All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jorge Acosta Palmer, and I'm the director of the statewide training initiative with Florida Legal Services. We're excited to have you join us here today for our webinar, From Awareness to Action, Mitigating Bias in Public Interest Law for Veterans. Before I introduce our speaker, I do want to go through some quick housekeeping announcements. This training is being recorded. You're going to receive a copy of this recording in an email from Zoom within 24 hours. If you don't see that email, I'm going to drop my email anyway in the chat just in case. We will be posting it on YouTube, so that should also be posted within 24 hours. Feel free to reach out to me if there's anything that you need related to the recording. I will also drop a link to the materials folder where you will find the slides that will be used for today's webinar. This training was approved by the Florida Bar for 1 General CLE credit and zero point 0.5 Professionalism CLE credits. I'll announce the CLE code towards the end of the session. I will also drop it into the chat, and it will also be included both in the email from Zoom, and it will also be on the YouTube description. Those captions are enabled for anybody who needs them. If you're having any issues with accessibility or the captions, you can feel free to reach out to me directly. This training is being hosted by the Public Interest Law section of the Florida Bar, or PILS. If you're not familiar with PILS, I encourage you to visit their website and take a peek. There's a lot of great committees and work groups that you could join. So I'll drop the link for the Public Interest Law section on the chat. And final piece of housekeeping announcements are questions and answers. So for this webinar, it's going to be kind of conversation style. So feel free to use both the chat or the Q&A feature. We will try to address these questions as we go. If for whatever reason we miss a question, we will do our best to address those questions towards the end. And towards the end of the webinar, if we can try also, if you want to raise your hand, I can try to bring you off mute if you would prefer to just speak up. We can do that towards the end of the webinar as well. So it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Emmanuel Manny Bonilla. Manny was born in Lansing, Michigan, but was raised in Alabama. He holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's in clinical psychology. He is a graduate of Stetson University College of Law. Since his time in the military, Manny has been involved with numerous advocacy organizations ranging from the Arizona Psychological Association, state criminal justice initiatives, veterans clinics and initiatives, to chairing the Military Legal Assistance Panel with the Arizona State Bar. More recently, Manny has decided to combine his previous experience in the mental health field with his current law career to help strengthen the advocacy field. His training on implicit bias while working with veteran populations is a combination of his personal experiences as a veteran and working with veterans coupled with his formal academic and professional experiences. Every course he teaches allows the training to evolve and grow as attendees' personal and professional experiences are added to the training. Thus far, Manny has been privileged to share some of his training with the National Law School Veterans Clinic Consortium Veterans Legal, that's a really long name, Cornell Law School Veterans Clinic, and the Equal Justice Conference 2025 in San Francisco, coming up in May 15, 2025. And when Manny isn't working on veterans issues or finding some project to be involved in, he can be found passing his time solving puzzles, playing computer games, and lounging around with his pups and wife. So without further ado, Manny, thank you for your service, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jorge. So again, welcome everybody. I appreciate you taking this time to come listen to me discuss something that I find very important and applicable in everyday life. I am definitely more used to being in person rather than Zoom or webinar, but we will make it happen. So for the first poll, if Ray want to put that up, and I don't know, there we go. So how many of you experienced or witnessed somebody else witness biases or witness somebody else experiencing biases? And I'm not sure if that closes automatically or we just kind of go on.
To close it, just giving everybody a
Okay,
second to be able to answer it. Looks like we're
awesome.
almost at 20 answers, so I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll and display the results.
Awesome. Great. So 90 or 89% said yes, 11% said no, and 0% said I'm not sure. I'm surprised. Usually I would expect a little bit more of the I'm not sure because not everybody really understands what biases encompass, and we have different thoughts and perceptions. For those of you that said no, hopefully, after this training, you'll kind of get a little bit more insight and awareness and be able to see those situations again with new eyes and then reevaluate, right? So I'm gonna have to close the chat because it won't let me move my slides without it. So for the agenda today, we already did introduction housekeeping. We'll be going over understanding biases, stereotypes, and prejudices, how biases develop and their impact on veterans, mitigating biases and strengthening advocacy, and then the Q&A and closing remarks. Each of these sections are broken up, so you'll see a red slide at the beginning. If you have any questions about any of the sections as we're going through, please feel free to put it in the chat. Jorge can stop me at any point, let me know that there's questions, and we can address them each of the red slides. If you have a question for the tail end, we can wait till then, um, and we kind of go from there. Disclosure, we are talking about personal things that may feel unsettling for people. This may involve the use of words that have an offensive meaning, so I invite you to sit within that feeling here and process that feeling in a safe space of discourse and conversation. However, if you feel the need to leave, please do so in a respectful and quiet manner. Since we are on Zoom, that offers the ability to simply just turn off your cameras, walk away, take a deep breath. So, understanding biases, stereotypes, and prejudices. Tolerance and understanding won't trickle down in our society any more than wealth does. Muhammad Ali. For those of you that don't know, Muhammad Ali is a kind of a well-known philosopher and a very great comedian for some of his old stuff. Biases exist in all people. I'm here to tell you that not only do you have biases in every aspect of your life, it is necessary for your survival. The question then isn't, am I biased? The question is actually, what function are my biases serving? In order for us to get from am I biased to what function are my biases serving, requires us to first have an understanding of what biases are and how do they differ from other commonly used terms like stereotypes and prejudices. To be clear, there are numerous subtopics related to bias, such as motivational bias, cognitive bias, implicit bias, explicit bias, etc. However, for the sake of brevity, the majority of this presentation will be focused on general bias on a whole rather than any one specific subset of biases. And so what are the definitions of biases, stereotypes, and prejudices? Unfortunately, I have to give you these book definitions, but they do serve a purpose, so bear with me. Biases, according to Merriam-Webster, as a noun and is an inflection of temperament or outlook. It's an instance of such prejudice. As a verb, biases means to give a settled and often prejudiced outlook to. According to Black's Law Dictionary, it's an inclination, a preconceived opinion, a predisposition to decide a case or an issue in a certain way, which does not leave the mind perfectly open to conviction. A man cannot be prejudiced against another without being biased against him, but he may be biased without being prejudiced. And according to the American Psychological Association, bias is a partiality, an inclination or predisposition for or against something. As we can see, the common theme of bias is to have an inclination or a preconceived notion. Stereotypes are defined, according to the APA, as a set of cognitive generalizations about the qualities or characters of the members of a group or social category. In Black's Law Dictionary, stereotypes are the relative fixed, erroneous, and negative generalizations held true for certain groups. And with Merriam-Webster, stereotypes are something that's conforming to a fixed or general pattern, standardized mental picture that is held in common by members of a group or that represents an oversimplified opinion, prejudiced attitude, or uncritical judgment. And so in comparison, well, as we see, when it comes to stereotypes, we're typically focused on the group as a whole, right, rather than necessarily an individual. In comparison, prejudice is defined as, according to the APA, a negative attitude toward another person or group formed in advance of any experience within that person or with that person or group. And with Black's Law, it's a forejudgment, a bias, a preconceived opinion. And then with Merriam-Webster, prejudice is defined as the irrational attitude of hostility directed against an individual, a group, a race, or their supposed characteristics. And so that allows us to kind of give everybody on the face an equal footing on what those concepts are. or definition. And so what are the similarities and differences between these concepts? Well, now that we're on the same page for how biases, stereotype, and prejudices are defined, we can now start to understand how they're similar and how they're different. Starting with bias, biases are typically expressed or thought of in either implicit or explicit fashion. The important difference, thing to keep in mind between implicit and explicit bias is the process by which it manifests. Implicit bias manifests as an unconscious attitude. It's an internal action or reaction that you're not readily aware of. In contrast, explicit bias is an external presentation that can be readily identified by yourself and others around you. So to that poll earlier, when I asked, if you had experienced biases or if you had witnessed, what I'm really asking is it something that you saw within yourself, or is it something that you perceived outside? And so we'll cover more of that throughout. Um, ex Internal action or reaction. In contrast, explicit bias is an external presentation that can be readily identified. It can take the form of actions, words, behaviors, and encompass actions that are subtle or overt. So explicit bias isn't necessarily always readily evident. It can be very questionable. You can leave the situation kind of wondering, did that occur? Microaggressions are things that we think of often, and they're typically a form of implicit bias by their nature, right? Microaggressions tend to be something that people just react on without really having the conscious forethought of realizing that they are acting in such a fashion. But microaggressions are great for their presentation in the explicit nature of showing what it looks like to have an explicit bias. So stereotypes are the same as biases in their base nature of incorporating incomplete or false information to arrive at a negative conclusion towards others. However, stereotypes differ from biases through their development and the protection for correction, as well as the potential for harm due to lack of growth. So specifically, since stereotypes are derived from cognitive schemas, and side note, Jean Piaget, which is a Swiss psychologist, developed cognitive development theory, which we utilize in psychology, and it theorizes how schemas allow organisms to interpret and understand the world around them, hence the term cognitive schema and its relevation to the stereotypes. Since we interpret information in an effort to understand the world, exposure to a wide variety of social groups directly influences our understanding and immediate interpretation of verbal and nonverbal information. So, put all of that kind of in a longer summarization, stereotypes are like biases in that they are a mix of implicit and explicit, yet differ in their ease of ability to grow and evolve. Something interesting that I found about stereotypes as I was doing research, amongst other things, is that racial stereotypes are rarely ever created. They're actually recycled from previous subordinate groups to newer subordinate groups. And by the definition of subordinate groups, I mean those that are being discriminated and targeted against. So an example I found interesting for some of the terms that have been used to describe racial groups over the years are things similar keywords, right? Like savage, uncivilized, and gambling. These are used to describe Native Americans and African Americans throughout time. Lazy and criminals, right? And that's been used to describe Hispanic and African Americans, and surprisingly as well, Irish American and Italian Americans during um, during the migration. I want to say migration, but that's not it. When there was a mass influx back in the Ellis Island kind of period. Excuse me, my history is horrible, so I should have definitely put that down somewhere. A side note to note, though, not such a funny thing, was that the FBI statistics reflect that 51% of African Americans were perpetrators of homicide, yet they make up 47% of the exonerations for wrongful convictions since 2016. And so it really goes to show the focal point of the stereotype and ideology that these individuals are criminals, yet bypasses the instance of, but are they actually criminals or are they just being targeted and falsely discriminated against? Something else that I thought was interesting, and I've even seen permeated throughout my time growing up, is the object of the sexualization or the sexual objectification of women, African American women, Hispanic women, and Asian women. What I found really interesting was that the US at one point actually had laws barring the importation of Asian women. And that is the literal aspect of it, the importation of Asian women. So it just really goes to show what they viewed, how they viewed Asian women at that particular point in time. So I think the definition from the last slide perfectly encapsulates the dynamic between prejudice and bias. Bias naturally exists within someone who is prejudiced, yet arguably, or yet someone who is biased isn't necessarily prejudiced, right? And so arguably prejudice and stereotypes are more alike than prejudice and biases. Where prejudice is based on a lack of information, an individual can actually become less prejudiced when they're around individuals who are less prejudiced. While on the same coin, other side of the coin, they can become more prejudiced by being around people who are prejudiced. And so just so we're kind of all on the same page, racism, ageism, sexism, all these isms are they're all types of prejudice. So the role of bias in shaping perceptions and decision making, right? We have, like I said earlier, we all have biases within us, right? There's a survival function for some. Those are what I would consider a positive bias, right? So we have a fear of the dark. We have this perception that if we go out somewhere and it's super dark, we're going to be harmed in some way. That is an inherent biological survival function that we have developed from years upon years when there was a time where we didn't have light, we didn't have fire, and the dark very well can hurt because um, we are not designed, so to speak, to survive in a complete dark environment. We don't have the capacities to see in the night and stuff like that. Versus negative bias have no survival function. And so, example, microaggressions. In photography, there's a thought that when you take a photograph in color, you're trying to present something about the image, whether the colors, the fashion, the model, etc. If you take a photograph in black and white, you're trying to elicit or evoke a feeling. So we're going to do the same thing. What I want you to do is I'm going to put a picture up, and I want you to just write in the chat the very first thing. Or here you go, write in the poll. What is the first thing you notice about the photograph? So I might have to move this to. Let's see. There we go. I had to remove the poll. So we'll take a second for that. I hope me closing the poll didn't close it for everybody else.
It is a short answer, so I see that people are typing. I can't see the answers yet, so I can't do spoilers. And well,
Yeah, no worries.
see a few answers coming in. So
I thought I can actually do a poll.
okay, let's give it. See maybe one more answer, and I'm gonna close it in 3, 2, 1. Okay, one more answer came in, and I'm gonna. Oh, I see now. I see a few more. Okay, 3, 2, 1, and pull and sharing the results. Let's see.
All right. So it doesn't show it
Well,
for
you,
me.
yeah, you don't. I can read them out loud. So the first one that I have here is sad. I have another one for the veteran needing help and feeling shame. I have another one for veteran. I have sadness. Veteran is homeless. The veteran looks overweight. Poor vet. The kid's face. The homeless veteran. Veteran collection bucket. The child's expression. It seems like the
Uh,
most popular one was veteran, but it's interesting how we had the collection bucket, the child, different observations there. So I'm gonna start
yeah,
sharing
so
the results.
perfect. Awesome. I like it. I know me personally, when I first look at the picture, I first saw it, the thing I noticed was the buildings in the background. It just looked like a major metropolitan. So it reminded me of a stark contrast when I think of areas like Dubai or something like that, where you hear about the economic divide. There's no right, wrong answer for this whatsoever. There's nothing meant by it. It is a black and white photo, and it is meant to elicit more of a feeling. Yet I chose it for this point because one of the things that we really don't think about is how biases inadvertently impact our thoughts and feelings toward everything that we're involved with, from images to videos to interactions. So if we look at the photograph and review some of your submissions, we see a range of things that people notice in the first image. Even though majority focused on the veteran, I think that really encapsulates what we're taught in the Western side of the world, where you go left to right, right? Your eyes naturally gravitate toward the left of something, and as you take in the image, it goes to the right. Versus majority of people didn't really notice the kid initially at first, or even the buildings or the words, the money, right? You didn't know those things that tend to be in the middle or the right side of the image. You kind of notice those on the left first. And so um, why do you think that is, right? Well, like I said, it's usually because in the Western world, that's the way we're taught. Um, and so something to think in mind is what would cause somebody then to view the image from top to bottom, right? What would cause somebody, again, like I said, my first thought was I saw the buildings in the middle, so I saw the center. My interactions throughout life has taught me to kind of look at the center of things and then take the scope out from there. Part of that is also my military training, right? You aim center mass for a lot of things, and so the center tends to be a huge focus. Um, but again, why would somebody look top to bottom? Why would they look bottom to top? What would look right to left, right? Can anyone think of a culture that reads books differently than how we're taught in America, right? When we read books, we're taught left to right and reinforces, or left to right, yes, so it reinforces things. What about the way that languages are written? And if you want to write it down in the chat, feel free to. I appreciate those. I know that there are at least 10 languages in the world that are written right to left. And just a few of those are Arabic, Aramaic, Hebrew, Persian. What I really thought was interesting is despite that list, Japanese wasn't on it. And I've always grown up to hear or to understand as Japanese being right to left. So I did a little research digging into that because I was wondering why. Come to find out, Japanese has all three. They do right to left, up, down, and left to right. It's just become more popular. It really depends on the circumstance, the situation. Um, so there are things that there are other places in the world that do things a little bit differently. How does this work, and how does this come into play with biases, right? Well, simple, right? The way to address this, I think, what happens when you come across somebody that doesn't do things the way you do them, right? What happens when you come across somebody that is reading something different or isn't able to see something that you see, or for those that majority is right hand and your first interaction with somebody that wrote left-handed. I know it probably was like, wow, what are you doing? That's weird. Um, and so we think that everybody is tend to have we tend to have that bias that everybody's doing the same thing that we are doing. And so that's something I want you to kind of keep in mind is what is your immediate reaction to someone who doesn't know how to do something that you think is common knowledge, right? They don't know how to fill out a form properly or research or record, get their records, right? The military records, or look at a DD 214 or complete an intake, right? Side note, common knowledge is not common by any means. It's very specific. But on the most positive side, typically when we come across somebody that doesn't do things the way we do things or that does them a little bit different, we think they just don't know or they haven't experienced that situation yet. On the most negative side, we think they're imbeciles and find it surprising that they're still functioning in the world as human beings, right? A personal situation I experienced as a supervisor occurred to me when I was in the field training. I was with the National Guard, and there was a young lady who was being made fun of by two other women who were her friend. They called her stinky, lazy, dirty. I naturally inquired what was the issue, and they told me that she didn't shower, didn't wash her clothes, and was having overall bad hygiene habits. I asked them if they knew that she was supposed to shower and wash clothes more regularly. They started laughing. They looked at me like I was crazy. They told me, of course, she knows that because everyone knows that's what you're supposed to do. I acknowledged the comments and I gave them a second and I reiterated. but did you ask her if she knows? And they stopped and paused. And again, they kind of just chuckled and walked away. Um, but prior to that, I told them about an instance I'd had with a guy before, and so um, they chuckled and then walked away. Needless to say, they came back to me a few days later, and they told me they did ask her. They ended up asking her about it, and that she didn't know. She didn't know that you're supposed to shower and wash clothes regularly. That the way that she had been living would be considered dirty and unhygienic. And she didn't know that because she was never taught it by her parents. That her parents usually washed her clothes for her, and they never really forced her to shower all the time and stuff like that. And so, sitting down and being able to have that discourse with them and process that with their disbelief that wow, there's people out there that aren't taught the same thing, right? Like I thought this was common. You're supposed to shower every day, especially you're in the field, you're dirty, you're sweaty. You're supposed to shower, you're supposed to wash your clothes. If you don't have clean clothes, you're putting on dirty clothes or wet clothes or something like that, like it can cause bad issues. Yet they didn't. And so that realization setting in was something that we all kind of learned. And so it was through that experience of biases. So how do biases develop and what are the impact on veterans? Everything that irritates us about others can lead to an understanding of ourselves. C.G. Jung, who is also a well-known psychologist. Biases are formed through societal influences and personal experiences. Typically, we get that from one of two ways. I know a lot of people have heard nature versus nurture, so something that's inherent in us versus outside of us. Biases are different than that fundamental aspect of nature versus nurture because um, typically nobody's born a racist, right? That is an age-old adage. So everything we learned about the world, we learn from those around us and in the world. So that includes our family. What do your parents say about others? How does your family react to others? What they don't say but do around others. Nonverbals for some individuals speak more volume than any amount of verbals could ever speak. What is the environment? What are our schools? Who makes up our schools? What are we watching on the news? What are we hearing about incidents? Things like that, right? So this is where we get it. Um, and like I said, age-old adage, no one is born racist. This is reflected in the development of biases. It is almost entirely dependent on what we are taught by those close to us in our environment. For those of you who've never watched the movie 42, there is a scene where Jackie Robinson is going to bat for the first time in a league game. There's a young white boy, he's probably close to 10 years old, who is initially excited about seeing Jackie Robinson play. He's just there to watch baseball. Um, and then as everyone around him, Jackie goes up to bat, everyone around him starts calling Jackie slurs, throwing things, saying hateful things. The boy looks confused and startled. He's never probably seen this before, ever. After a few minutes of looking around, scared and nervous, the young boy starts calling Jackie the same things that his father and the other men around him are calling Jackie. He starts throwing things as well. He emulates their behavior. And that emulation is a perfect example of how biases are formed through societal influences and through our personal experiences. When we are young, we only know of kids as being kids. Sure, we notice different things about kids, right? We notice that they have different hair, they may be taller, they have glasses or not. Their skin color may be a little bit different, but we don't necessarily think about them as being stupid, as being lazy, as being criminals, and we definitely don't think about them as being second-class citizens, unless you're probably royalty in the British somewhere or something like that, and you're born and raised with servants, then maybe. But any more than that, we don't know any more than that, and we can know if like the rotation of Venus is superseded by the mass of Mars, right? As kids, we just don't know about those labels, about those things. And so the same thing holds true as we get older. We rely heavily on the news to let us know about the world events. We rely on experts to let us gossip or to know about their fields of study. We rely on town gossip to inform us about the people we live with. Despite being in a world where information retrieval has never been easier, we rely heavily on others, our family, our coworkers, our immediate environment, to be the judge and jury of the world as a whole. And when what happens when the information that we receive and rely upon is wrong, incorrect, or simply presented as negative information against other groups, Sometimes an excess of information can be lessened, attempt to ensure that information is accurate, especially if it comes from people we deem to be reliable. And so very rarely do we ever challenge information that we receive, yet in psychology, I kind of always taught me is always question. It probably will get you in trouble more times than not, and you'll get labeled as defiant or argumentative. But when somebody tells you something, you ask why, right? Why is it this way? Why did we do it that way? Why is it that there are more things that get done in the world by simply asking why and seeking an understanding of it than just by following blindly. And so, how does this tie into veterans, right? How does this tie into what we're here for, the advocacy and the bias of veterans and such? Well, three simple questions I want you to kind of take into mind. Again, you can write this in the chat, you can share it, you can write it down. What are your personal experiences with veterans? For some of us, we have no military connection to veterans prior to joining the service. For others, their uncles, their aunts, there's brothers, sisters, mothers, and fathers who were military. Sometimes it's generations upon generations. Other times, we don't learn about previous veterans in our family until some record pops up, right? Somebody passed away and we get their belongings and we see their treasure trove of information and records. For me personally, I knew of an uncle when I was growing up that had served in Vietnam, and we were told never to ask him about it. But I didn't know that my grandfather and his brother had also served in Vietnam. Their mother came over from Mexico and immigrated over in Texas. They were born in Texas, and shortly around the time that they had reached young adults, they were drafted into Vietnam and sent. So they all survived physically, but I can only wonder how they survived mentally. So then that goes, what was the first military movie, right? Like we think about that. What is our first interaction? If family and stuff isn't our first interaction for it, then maybe we saw it in a movie or a TV or a show. For those of you familiar with it, my first military movie was Good Morning Vietnam, good old Robin Williams. I thought it was hilarious, him signing on with that. That was one of my first interactions with it. And then I also had the movie Platoon and a few others, Full Metal Jacket. Um, and then we also have, what have you heard specifically about the military, right? Most people would say, thing I hear about the military stands out is they're extremely patriotic. They do it for a selfish cause, a selfish need. Um, I don't want to burst the bubbles, but when I joined it, it definitely wasn't for a sense of patriotism, honor, or duty. It was a need to get out of where I was. I was low income and I couldn't afford anything else. Throughout my time in the military, I only met one person that was patriotic, and I to this day I can remember everybody's reaction in the tent when he disclosed it, because you don't really see too many people. You know people that had family members that had served. Again, their brothers or their mothers or their fathers served, but the term patriotic was not really in there. It was usually a need, right? Or they wanted to get away or they wanted to do something else and where they were at just didn't afford them the opportunities. And so the military was their way out. And so the point for that is that our biases towards veterans is often positive. It's often lighthearted. It's often funny or whatever the case may be. And so we often think of veterans as brave, tough, more capable than the average citizen. And as I often see in communicating service and throughout service, outside of service, veterans are those that have written a blank check to the United States of America for an amount up to and including their life. I can personally attest that this statement is accurate, and yet it really falls short of the reality of that cash check because it's not only the veterans that have written that check for their life, but it is the family members that sign on with that veterans and the kids that have yet been born that fall into that life that also pay for that amount. And so, if we tend to have positive biases towards veterans, then why would that suddenly be changed simply because of the color of their skin or the situation that we're engaged with them in? Remember, biases are a survival function. They're developed based on our environment and our family. So if your environment hasn't been veterans and military, then what has your environment been? If it has been veterans and military, Does that mean you're more culturally aware of the issues than someone who has never been around veterans? I don't know. Whatever it is, that is where you'll naturally return to when in doubt about how to deal with the new encounter or with someone who doesn't fit into a mold previously constructed due to stereotypes and biases. This is not to say that every interaction that you have with veterans will be negative or bad, or with somebody that necessarily fits into a negative biases. And here's a veteran that you're going to treat them negatively or bad. There could be an opposite effect where you provide favoritism toward the veteran that you wouldn't have done for another. I think that's something that people often tend to overlook because biases is usually focused on the positive aspects of it. And usually when we think of somebody that's being favored, that's not usually a negative thing, but it can be, dependent upon the group that you're serving, you're advocating for. If you advocate for one veteran at 150% and you advocate for another veteran at 90%, that is an inherent bias that works against one veteran or another. Um, Again, as we touched on earlier, beginning of the slide, biases isn't always negative. And so some of the other things, key points I put up here, again, would be, if you think Black people are criminals, you're most likely going to view the veteran discharged for allegedly committing misconduct as guilty. If you believe women are inherently sexually promiscuous, then you're more likely to believe that the female veteran alleging sexual assault is lying. If you believe immigrants are leeching off the system, then you're just as likely to view the veteran who isn't a citizen as a traitor to the country. Yes, there are veterans who aren't citizens, that they get their citizenships in service. I've seen a few of those and actually just recently helped a veteran get his citizenship. There are women that are, when they go for discharge upgrades, they are given the 10th degree in terms of, why didn't you do this? Why did you do that? There are male victims, sexual assault victims, who are still not looked upon favorably, who are denied access to shelters and homes and upgrades simply because males don't get raped, right? Those are thoughts and those are beliefs that are inherent within our system. Um, so things to keep in mind, and this can go across any kind of aspect, but it starts with what are the things that you typically associate with that individual. So, the impact of these biases in legal advocacy. So here's something what I want you to do. Everybody take a piece of paper if you have it in front of you. It doesn't have to be long. And I just want you to write down on a line numbers 1 to 10. And I want you to take each of these terms and place them below corresponding to that number on the line, right? 1 on the line means you have no issue with this whatsoever. It means you would be able to assist a veteran with no problem. So whether that's rape, murder, drug abuse, schizophrenia, petty theft, major theft, fraud, you put that on 1, you won't have any issue representing veterans for that. 10 means you might not be able to assist them with the issue, right? Whether that's personal or professional means, something that's occurred to you before, maybe you're the victim of a murder, or you were, you dealt with your own drug abuse issues, and you prefer to stay away from those situations for health reasons, right? It just means you wouldn't be able to assist with them. There's no right or wrong answer to this whatsoever. It's simply a tool to put in your toolbox for the occasional use. It's something that I do for myself quite often. It's a simple check-in. Here is where I am today. Here's where I am this month, or whatever the case may be. Here are the situations I came across, right? And initially, something for me that was a 7 or 8 is now more of a 2 or 3. And it's different for everybody, but it's something that you're able to kind of work on one step at a time. While I go through the rest of the information for the slide, please continue rating the items, and then I'll come back to them in just a minute. For those of you that don't know, advocatus, I hope I say that right. I probably don't though, because I don't speak Latin, and it is a Latin word. It means advocate. It means to be called or summoned, or more specifically, to come to someone's aid in the courtroom. My coworker Anna Maria shared before, and I'm paraphrasing this. It's important for us to journey to discover who we are and fight our biases. If we don't, then our representation of veterans may be less effective. By journeying together and developing, we build trust so that we can help unearth information and evidence that was not previously available. Furthermore, we can potentially avoid missing arguments or claims because we will have developed the skills needed to think outside of the box of our limited information. And so, oftentimes our first interaction with veterans is them coming to us for assistance, whether that's for the completion of an intake form, a document, a claim, a phone call, or an in-person visit. Regardless of the modality presented, more often than not, you will get someone guarded, hesitant, avoidant, secretive, or even seemingly dismissive, angry. I had a veteran at the Arizona stand-down I was working at the other day become hostile during the middle of the presentation because they're middle of the consult because he really wanted me to call somebody on his behalf. He didn't want to call them. He wanted me to call them. And I had to stand firm and say, I won't call them. That's not my place, nor is that what we're here for. And throughout the end, of course, he became extremely aggressive. Stay ground, right? A lot of times, these other things, the guardant, the hesitant, the avoidant, secretive, even seemingly dismissive, those are the things that you're really just telling yourself that this veteran is. But why though? Right? Most likely you'll think about it and you'll say it's because of the nature of my work, because people come to me for help, our services are not the most upstanding, or naturally have received some legal trouble or have some issues, right? The veteran that I encountered, I thought was, yeah, his situation is really akin to fraud. He knows he's in trouble. That's why he's angry at me because I won't help him get him out of trouble. But then you have to really sit there and think about it. Is the veteran coming to you, right? Is that what the situation is? When I thought about that situation, I realized, no, I don't know, right? That could be one aspect of it, but the veteran could very much have a substance use. They could have genuine fear. They could have a distrust of whatever the situation may be because they have interacted with police before and police have, arrested them or mistreated them. There could be a number of factors there rather than this veteran is angry at me specifically because I won't do what they want me to do, right? And so the same thing I want you to kind of take in mind with the veteran you interact with is the veteran who's coming to you who seemingly forgot most of their experiences in service less truthful than the veteran who can recall everything, right? If one veteran can recount everything that they've ever done and another veteran can't, is one more truthful than the other? I, I don't know, maybe. But what I do know is that their secretiveness, their avoidance, their anger, the frustration is probably more indicative of what we are projecting onto them rather than what they're actually exhibiting. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves, how would we feel if somebody came to us for help, excuse me, and they became angry, hostile, or they forgot about us? If they were unwilling to hear our issues, if they were didn't have patience with us as we struggled to find solid footing, or they just refused to help because they were tired and upset, we would feel even more defeated. And oftentimes that's what I have to remind myself to the veterans that do lash out to me is that I am not the first person that they have come across within this system. Even though my biases are telling me that they have an issue with me, they're trying to fight with me, that they deserve all of this, it is a moment to check that and say, but wait, why is that the case? Well, it's because I'm feeling disrespected. Why am I feeling disrespected? Because they're yelling at me or because they're blaming me for their issues that they got into, right? There's all reasons for this. But the core of that is I'm not the first advocate for them to come to. You are not the first advocate for them to come to. How many advocates before you forgot about them or dropped the ball on something or got upset with them or dismissed them, right? And they keep coming to help. So I'm not saying every veteran is in this particular situation, but chances are the majority of them are. So going back to that list, I was going to have everybody raise a hand as to some of the questions, but obviously we can't. So instead, what I actually do is if you want to put it in the chat, how many of you were able to put um, rape in the first three? So you were able to rate the rape as one, two, three. How many of you had more than one item listed at one, right? never a point in time did I say you can only have one for each item. It is all about where you are. So if you have petty theft, major theft, and drug abuse all under one, then very well. That's where you're at with those. How many of you had more than one item at number 10? Right. So if you had schizophrenia, rape, and murder at number 10, right? Again, it's not about right or wrong. It's about where you're at. And did anyone not have any items for the last three? Did anybody, 7, 8, 9, or 8, 9, 10? There was nothing there. Everything that you had, you could do all those with no issue to, it depends on the day kind of issue, right? So maybe a 5. So again, keep that. It's a tool to be used. Use it to check in when you come across veterans that you're interviewing or advocating for, and they have these diagnoses or these have the criminal charges of the situation. Check in with yourself afterwards. See where you're at. See, are you more agitated? Are you more flustered? Are you feeling like you have to go home and have a glass of wine or decompress for the day, right? Because of certain veterans. And then use those as hall markers to check in. Those would be your veterans that are probably closer to that 10, right? There's a complete issue. Why? Start checking in with yourself and understand what it is about this veteran and your biases and what you're harboring towards those situations that are impacting you on an internal level. So on to the last section, mitigating bias and strengthening advocacy. To change ourselves effectively, we first had to change our perceptions, right? And so that's why a lot of this is really focused on us as the internal, because the world as we see it is the world as we see it, right? Um, Only when we start to understand how we view the world and communicate with the world from the inside out can we best understand how to advocate for our veterans and their internal world to the external world. So 3 things will help you develop your advocacy skills: knowledge, awareness, and practice. You can think of each of these as a side of a triangle. And so um, knowledge can mean a lot of different things. Knowledge can mean ranging from book to TED Talks to CLE credits. Welcome, thank you. To biases specifically, for interacting with others and getting to know them. One of the things I enjoy most doing is asking people about different accents, with different accents, about their accents. So if I overhear somebody that has a strong accent from a place, I take it as personal amusement to myself, and trying to guess, where is it from? Or if I can, I think about it. Have I heard that before? Is it the same area? And then I ask the individual about it. Hey, if you don't mind, where are you from? I hear your accent. It sounds like such and such. Is that, am I close? And I also find it's a great conversation starter with people, to ask genuine questions about their culture, about food, local spots, overall interest to read or hear about. People love talking, typically love talking about the areas they're from. And so they will be happy to typically be happy to share their favorite food spot or the new attraction or the up and coming for their place. The most awkward part about asking someone about their culture or country of origin is the risk of sounding ignorant for retelling something I've heard, right? I've heard this or I've heard that. I've learned to just welcome that feeling, and I encourage you to do the same as advocates. When you're talking with veterans and they're talking about their military experiences, ask them about it, right? When they're talking about their MOSs, when they're talking about their job, don't assume that the one military veteran that was field artillery is going to be the same as another veteran you're talking to is field artillery. Ask them about it. And if there is a slight offense to it, apologize, right? Thank them for allowing you to learn something new that you didn't know before. Emphasize it. I didn't know, but I appreciate you telling me that you didn't know. Rarely have I ever come across somebody that continued to get angry or upset. Most of the time they say, "Oh, okay." And they apologize for their reaction, and then we move on and we learn together. So developing knowledge is the easiest thing we can do to help the base understanding of our biases in the world. How many of you have heard about the massive flooding that occurred in Valencia, Spain, a couple of months ago? It killed numerous people, destroyed a lot of property. A lot of the deaths and destructions could have been mitigated if the government hadn't dropped the ball. Similarly, we've had floodings, fires, and tornadoes with numerous deaths here. Now, how many of you know that people from all over Spain came to Valencia to help the locals clear debris, find lost loved ones, clear up vast amounts of mud from the city? How many of you know that here in Florida or California, sorry, video, Florida, here in California, over in California, that Canada and Mexico sent firefighters and crew to help combat the fires in LA, right? I had the opportunity to visit the flood impacted areas of Valencia not long ago, and I can tell you, I never knew that the Spaniards had a connection like that amongst the people. But after I visited the area and I saw the thank you and I saw the impact and I saw the people helping, and I walked away with a new appreciation, understanding that I will never forget the connection that Spaniards have for each other as a people, right? For that love and help of each other. And so knowledge can mean a lot of things, and the best method of getting knowledge is to interact with others. And so while knowledge is that interaction for outside, the awareness is dependent on the internal. It marks the first steps of what do I think, feel, believe about. As stated earlier, I am from Alabama. Though I was born in Michigan, my hometown claim is Alabama because I spent the majority of my life there. As such, I can personally attest to numerous beliefs and jokes related to Alabamians. Similarly, as a mixed man, I can personally attest to the thoughts and beliefs of those in the South and other areas of the states towards African Americans. I have had people walk across the street from me. I've had people throw things at me and call me slurs. I even had people tell me I wasn't welcome in their homes, in their counties, and I had best be on my way. And for those of you that are not familiar with that saying, that is a very nice way of saying, we will kill you if you stay. Your veterans come from a wide variety of areas, from a wide variety of generations and situations. There are Vietnam veterans that I have worked with personally that were part of the racial riots in California. There are Vietnam vets that I have worked with that were part of the segregated units for mental health. There are veterans that I have worked with today that still were victims of different situations, whether it was in their city or was in the military units. Understand that knowledge and then your inner awareness of what you believe of the situation will oftentimes conflict. But that is the point for this, is that because of these interactions, I've had to look in on the mirror more occasions than I can count, right? Am I worthless? Am I a criminal? Do I deserve to be in higher education? Et cetera, et cetera. Imposter syndrome. Your veterans have had to do the same thing. Am I a veteran? Am I worthy of this? Do I deserve help? Who am I? What am I? So awareness tells us not only how the world makes us feel, yet it tells us how we feel about the world. Some of the veterans are very angry at the world because they're really angry at themselves, right? You have all experienced your own forms of self-awareness and questioning, whether it's your first love, your romantic attractions, worthiness as a parent or deciding not to be a parent, careers, travel, bills, etc. Our negative reflections of ourselves are merely our biases pointed inwards. I'm not smart enough. I don't deserve that promotion. It was my fault. Sometimes it is your fault. That's another story. Awareness may seem like it's one of the more difficult aspects because you think, how could I know what they are going through? Yet it is probably the easiest to understand and develop. You just have to reframe the question. For example, instead of, why are they so annoying? The question is better asked, why do I feel so annoyed? When we start to look at the mirror and reflect inwards, we start to realize just how much of our biases toward our veterans are biases that we hold toward ourselves and others. So, with knowledge and awareness, we're giving practice. Very old adage I love, know thyself. Practice is exactly what it sounds like. Nothing is ever gained passively except weight, taxes, and death. Those things will probably always be there passively. I can't explain that. But when it comes to advocacy and our veterans, you will have plenty of opportunities to put these things into practice. Despite being an Army veteran, I learned something new from every Army veteran I interact with. If you are just doing records review, try reviewing the records without seeing the gender or race of the veteran, simply guessing who they are. Your inherent biases will become known, right? And again, it's not a negative thing or a horrendous thing. It is merely a tool to develop your knowledge and awareness. If you're on the phone with a veteran, ask them something about their service-specific job that you think would be or wouldn't be part of the job. Practicing bias awareness is like trying to summit Mount Everest. You don't start by immediately going to the mountaintop. You start by first understanding the area, then you start by training, followed by planning the trip, and ultimately attempting it. Similarly, you don't become a non-biased advocate overnight or arguably ever. Again, I've been doing this for years, and there's still tons of experiences throughout every interaction where I get to work and refine and hone my tools, right? Rather, you start by getting knowledge of your clients. You become aware of the reaction you have towards them and their misconduct. You question why are you having those reactions so you can better understand your client and yourself. And then you put it all into practice one step at a time. Before you know it, you will be standing at the summit, looking out over a brighter world. The brightness isn't due to a lack of biases. It's the illumination you see for being able to see and understand the world in a brighter light. Just be careful though. Peace is a very addictive feeling. And when you start to understand yourself and the rest of the world, you realize you really start to develop inner peace and help. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention and appreciation. I hope I didn't run over on time, but if there are any questions, please feel free.
Timing wise, almost perfect. We still have about 4 more minutes. So if
Ooh,
anybody has any have any questions, comments, feel free to raise your hand, drop them in the chat. I just dropped the CLE code here into the chat. I'm gonna read it out loud just in case. The training was approved for 1 General CLE and zero point 0.5 Professionalism CLE credits. The code is 2501770N. And I will include that code in the YouTube description and in the email that will go out as well. So let's see if anybody, I don't see any questions, just a comment here. Wonderful training. Thank you. Let's give it maybe a few more seconds, see if anybody wants to ask a question.
thank you,
We have
thank
some
you all for
comments
attending.
here.
Yeah,
All right, so we're almost at time, so I just wanted to thank you all for joining us here today, and a mega thank you to our speaker Manny for sharing his expertise and providing all these valuable insights, and addressing biases to improve our advocacy for veterans. And I did mention that we do have the recording. We're going to be posting it on YouTube. I dropped the link to the materials into the chat as well. Be on the lookout for that email. It should go out within 24 hours, and it will be, as I said, it will also be on YouTube. So I dropped the CLE code into the chat, and I read it out loud, which I typically forget. So I hope you found this training helpful, and we encourage you to stay connected and join us in future trainings. So once again, thank you, Manny, for this amazing presentation, and everybody have a great rest of your day.
thank you.